Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Melissa Fecak from the firm of South Jersey Divorce Solutions, and I'm here with Meghan Bradley and Tricia Elliott. And what we're going to be speaking to today is we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and financial issues, specifically how this is impacting support, child support and alimony, and what you can do to kind of help yourselves through this process. So starting off, one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that with the COVID-19 crisis, we know that here in New Jersey, we've had over 850,000 people file for unemployment. And we also know that this is probably going to continue to rise. This is not the end. People who are filing for unemployment are struggling because the New Jersey system is just not really equipped for this amount of filings. And they are really struggling to make sure that they get through all these applications. So this is causing a lot of panic because people don't know if they're going to get benefits, when those benefits are going to start. A lot of people are wondering, is it the right move to file for unemployment? Should they be trying to find jobs? But really the job market is very different right now because of what's going on. The other people that are being impacted is small business owners that have tried to get the PPP loan through the CARES Act. And what they have found is that a lot of times their applications were rejected or not processed, and often it was because of large companies like we've seen in the news, like Ruth Chris and Shake Shack, were getting those benefits that were really tailored for the much smaller businesses. So this has again caused a struggle where people who were counting on those funds to be able to help them through this crisis are now struggling and trying to figure out how to, make it work. So what we were going to talk about today is some of the experiences that we have seen with our clients or just through other people that we've heard about, and specifically with alimony and child support. So Meghan, I know that you've gotten a couple of calls from prior clients who are struggling with these issues. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I've had a couple of calls over the last couple of weeks from clients that I represented years ago in connection with their divorce. One of my clients was a client that I represented through the collaborative divorce process, and we probably got her divorced about 7 years ago. And she called me and said, Meg, I'm expecting a percentage reduction in my salary in order to maintain my employment. How is that going to affect my alimony? She owes alimony to her ex-spouse. And I had another client who was the recipient of alimony, and she called and she said, I was just laid off. And like 2 days later, my ex-husband, contacted me and said, his business is lagging and he's going to have to cut the alimony that he's paying to me. What do I do? And to both of these clients, the question is, what do you do? What is the answer? There's a variety of ways to handle issues like this. What I had said, Melissa, was that I thought for both of them, for the one woman who is in who had used the collaborative process, I thought it was a really good time to come back to the collaborative process so that we can talk, she and I and her ex-spouse and his lawyer, about how we can get the two of them through this. Just as though they were married, they're not married any longer, but they still have legal obligations to each other. And we have to put our minds together. We have to, take a team approach and see if we can come up with some interim solutions for these kinds of cases. In the other case where it wasn't a collaborative process, I suggested there's also the possibility of mediation. And if both parties are trying to conserve funds, they can use a mediator and attend a mediation by Zoom video like this, maybe consult with counsel on the side, but mediate with the mediator and try to come to some accommodations. And these things can be resolved even on temporary basis. You don't need to make decisions to forego your support forever or to reduce it forever, but the alternatives of going to court and filing what we would call a motion, an application for the court to come up with a decision. Melissa, what have you been hearing about how court filings are going, or if they're even going?
Well, people are still filing things through the court. The courts are still working, but they're not working at normal capacity. And even when they are working at normal capacity, it can be weeks to maybe months before an application for a modification of support would even be heard.
Right.
Under these circumstances, I think the time frame is much longer from what I'm seeing from court applications and just speaking to other professionals about what their experience has been.
And Melissa, so also speaking to so some people would say, well, oh my gosh, these are emergent issues. Shouldn't the court set aside other things and help us deal with these loss of employment and decrease of income issues? Are the courts perceiving them as emergent at this point?
No, they're not, Megan. And that's the struggle that I think everybody's having is it's emergent to them. And I feel them. It is emergent when you were thinking about how am I going to feed my children? How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to keep up with my bills? Because I'm not getting the income or I'm not getting the support from my former spouse. It is an emergency. But the courts have clearly defined what they consider an emergency, and especially in this time. Issues with parenting time and custody are considered emergent. Issues of support is not. So it's not something that even under the best of circumstances would be heard right away.
Sure.
But right now, it's certainly not going to be heard right away. And I think that looking at alternatives as to ways to resolve this outside of the courthouse is probably the best idea. Don't you agree, Megan?
I do. And in fact, I've also heard that domestic violence matters, which are considered emergent, are on a backlog, and that applications filed in March are just now being heard rather than on the 10-day cycle that they're supposed to be heard on because of the lack of the court's capacity and the technology issues and all of that. So really, I think now better time than ever before to use these sort of out-of-court processes to help get through these issues, because the courts are really just not able to handle such a volume. They couldn't handle the volume in a regular time. Now consider 800,000 plus people in New Jersey seeking unemployment. Think of all of those cases that could possibly be impacted, prior divorce cases or support cases that are impacted by it. It's just not an option, and it can be done in a much more streamlined fashion and therefore a lot less expensively, and you can therefore preserve assets if you want to try to use the mediation process or the collaborative process.
I agree, Megan. I mean, I've seen and I've talked to other professionals, and what we've been talking about is, again, these struggles that we're not able to get in front of a judge. And so we have to look for alternatives as to how to resolve these kinds of issues. And I agree, mediation and collaborative process are two ways that this can be done almost immediately. I mean, if a client called me today and said they have an issue they want to mediate, I'm going to get them scheduled, if not today, probably within the next week. So, and I know that most of the other professionals that you and I deal with, Megan, are in the same position where we're going to be able to accommodate that client as soon as possible, as opposed to, again, waiting for weeks or even months.
Right, and I had a conference call this morning with two attorneys who are referring their clients to me for mediation. And in this particular case, because of some of the emotional issues that are involved, the counsel believe it might be better, at least the initial session, to have counsel in the session. And so that can certainly be done. And we've agreed that the first session will be with counsel to get the process going, to get everybody introduced. And then counsel, if we haven't resolved it in that first session, counsel may not appear at the next session, and it will just be the parties now that they've had a chance to get accustomed to what's going on. Because the thing is, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anger even in these cases. And when you have fear and anger, it's really hard to make really good decisions. But if you have a professionals helping you and a team approach helping you, I think you have to work through, even when you're in fear and you're angry, you have to get the issues resolved. So I think some of these outside of court processes are really meant for this. And Tricia, I think you can speak a little bit to the impact emotionally on a lot of people going through divorce right now.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, to everything you guys are saying, I'm seeing it as well, both in the counseling perspective and in the co-parenting mediation counseling sessions that I'm doing with folks. And I'm hearing a lot of the same things about uncertainty of the future. So even though folks want to see this as short term, that their life will, get back to normal at some point, the idea of not having an end in sight, when will I be able to go back to work? Or when it's time to go back to work, will my job even still exist? Will there be money to bring everyone back to the job? And so I'm hearing a lot of those fears. And then equally on the other side, if someone is a recipient of child support or alimony or both, the fear of that changing. I have several clients that their child support has changed because it is being automatically withdrawn from their former spouse's check, and they're seeing it arrive in different amounts because the person has been laid off. And so I think those are all very real things. And with that come these emotions, the emotions that have to be dealt with as well, that oftentimes are so very powerful and can impede the process of finding a resolution. You know, the idea of being fearful and having the unknown, those two tend to be very overwhelming. And then you pick the topic of finances, which is what most people make out to be their solid ground. You know, if I can pay my bills, if I can live my life, then I'm okay. And now we're kind of disrupting all of that. And so fear can lead to feelings of depression, desperation, isolation, feeling like you're alone. I mean, you're saying there's 800,000 people, and there's a lot of people. We all know them. But oftentimes people can feel so very alone in their fear and their thoughts of their future. Right. And of course, along with all of this can be the temptation for irritability and anger. Anger at your spouse that they can't pay and you're struggling, or anger that you have to pay and you're struggling. And then that anger can, exactly what you guys are saying, impede the process, which makes sense. It's such a challenging time right now. And so having those emotions and not knowing how to handle them because there's so many balls in the air makes it so difficult. And so what I've been encouraging people to do is along the same lines as you. First is, if you're not in counseling, get into counseling. If you're in a position where counseling is not an option, then perhaps having someone, if you have a pastor or a rabbi or some sort of support person that you can lean on outside of your nuclear household environment, can bounce things off of and kind of relay your concerns. And then on top of that, addressing your former spouse. If you can talk at the kitchen table and try to hash these things out for the short term, that's wonderful. If you're not able to, for whatever reason, then finding a mediator to talk through these issues is most ideal. And as you guys have already said, the idea that it would be short term, just until this time in our life has gone by and we're on the other side. And then, of course, the collaborative process is a delight, and folks can find much support in that environment as well. And so I'm encouraging people in the same way you guys are, and trying to take into account those feelings of desperation and fear that can be paralyzing. So these options are good in light of what we're all going through.
Now, wouldn't you agree, Tricia, that if we are handling this through mediation, we're dealing with the issue of child support and alimony, that's because of the emotional impact that it has, that sometimes it may be actually a great idea to bring someone like yourself into that process to kind of help to deal with those emotional issues that, as Meghan said, can often cloud or impact an ability of a spouse to make rational decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Oftentimes, attorneys and mediators will ask me to help participate, to help curtail some of the emotional component. And this time more than ever, because it's dealing with money. And, you know, so much of us find our stability in our financial security. So absolutely, having a counselor, a divorce coach, a mediator present during these decision-making times that are emotionally loaded can be life-saving, emotionally life-saving. Yeah.
Yeah, so in fact, in one of the cases that I have now in terms of mediating, I recommended that the parties reach out to Tricia for some co-parenting counseling because they're struggling in connection with co-parenting at this point. And so you can still continue in mediation with your mediator and at the same time be getting some guidance from a professional around co-parenting to help take out some of the heat that's going on, because there's heat around divorce in general, but when there's so much unknown around the finances at the same time as divorce, it can be completely overwhelming. And so as much professional assistance as you can afford, find the time to do is really, really well advised.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, this is such an emotional issue, and we say, well, it's only finances or it's only money, but there is so much more tied to it. And when someone loses their job, there's feelings of depression, there's feelings of being embarrassed or upset because of the loss of employment. And at the same time, there's a lot of hurt and resentment that they're feeling at their former spouse, which of course just makes it so much more explosive and such a really a difficult issue for people to deal with.
At the same time, they are issues that have to get addressed, and there are multiple ways of doing it, and there are better ways and there are more difficult ways and more expensive ways. These issues have to get addressed, as painful and as anger producing as they are. And if you can surround yourself with some professionals that are minded towards resolution, rather than sort of stuck in the ages of, well, let's just throw it to a judge and let the anger fester, that's just really never been helpful, and especially in light of the current really quite exacerbated financial circumstances.
Yeah. And one of the things we didn't really talk about, Megan, is that, if this were normal circumstances and somebody were to lose their job, under those circumstances, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that a week later they file an application for modification of support, because that application is going to go nowhere.
In fact, the statute on alimony speaks to that. The newer statute that was passed in 2013 speaks to the fact that you have to let a certain amount of time. I think it's 3 months at this point. You're supposed to let that amount of time pass before you're even going to have the ability to file an application without it being rejected. And so even in times before the pandemic, you needed to wait some amount of time, and there had to be some sense of that payor looking for other resources, looking for other ways to make up for the lost income. It's a little different now because you can't necessarily reinvent yourself into another career either, because all of the economy at this point is still closed down. So there was never going to be immediate relief, even in the best of times. And now especially with the court backlog, any kind of relief is going to be months down the road. And so if you want to figure things out in the short term to help ease the stress and to help you get through your daily life and caring for your families, really you have to dig deep and take some personal responsibility and talk to your spouse or former spouse and say, let's get some help, and let's, as a family living differently, even if you're not divorced, if you're already divorced and living separately and there are these post-divorce financial issues, we're still a family. We're just living separately. And so we still have to figure out how we're all going to survive.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, again, that's something where Tricia can really help people to understand that need to work as a family, that this is a family issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know and hear and see the hashtag "we're all in this together." Very, very true. And so while you do not want to be partners or spouses, we are all going through this together. And so it's no longer us versus them. It shouldn't be. And we can try to help you along in this difficult time to make a decision that's realistic and practical. So
and focused and focused even more so now on our children and the effect and the fallout on our children, because they're already feeling stress just around this pandemic. If you're in the middle of getting divorced, there's definitely stress around that. So we want to try to take as much of that stress away from our children and try to focus on being productive and coming to resolution that will make everybody feel more at peace and able to be the parents that they know they can be and that they are.
Yeah, I agree. So I think what you can take out of this presentation that we've done today is that we're suggesting, if you have these kind of issues, that you should look to go into mediation or collaborative practice. These are two types of processes that are going to allow you to work through your differences without having to worry about not being able to get to court, how long it's going to take, the costs that can be associated with court, which I don't even think we've really touched on, but there are a lot of costs that are associated with going to court, and that you have uncertain results where through mediation and collaborative, you and your ex-spouse are the ones who are making the determination.
Yep. Tough times, but there are still people out there that can help and that are willing to help, that have the time and the skill set to help and can work at your own pace. So So really seek out the advice of these kinds of professionals to help you at this point. That would be my guidance.
All right. Tricia, did you have anything else you wanted to mention, or?
We've been pretty thorough on this topic, and the one thing I've been reiterating to folks is please know that you are not alone and you do not have to go through this alone. That there are folks out there, professional support people, who can help you through.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today live. Again, as we always do, we're going to go through and give our information and how you can contact us. So I'm Melissa Fecak, and my firm again is South Jersey Divorce Solutions. You can find me on the web at www.sjdivorcesolutions.com. And I would be more than happy to talk to you further about this issue. Megan?
Thank you. Yeah, Meghan Bradley. I'm with DiLorenzo Bradley and Banfi in Morristown, and my website is www.dbbnjlaw.com. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Thanks, guys. I'm Tricia Elliott. One last time, my practice is in Cherry Hill. My website is my name, triciaelliott.com, and feel free to reach out. As like the lady said, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay.
Thank you
everybody next
everyone
week.
for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks.